Celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Jason Sisneros, buddy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to this. This is like, I felt like it was Christmas Eve, and I've been excited for having you on, buddy. It's really, really an honor for me to have you sitting here to be able to chat. I'll just, thanks, bud. I'm not a big believer in long intros, but you're probably going to make that tough. I'm just going to give a little bit of background, but you come from a world of, growing up, drugs, violence, abuse. You were homeless for a while. I believe your adopted father was arrested and imprisoned for attempted murder of you and your mother. And then you go to building this, beautiful life of, not only just personal, but business and financial success. And I would say, and I'll use my own words here, but you're a master of your psychology. And kind of where you've come from to where you are, it's unbelievable. You've done in business, I believe it's over 100 turnarounds of small and mid-cap sized companies. You own a consulting company called Anton Jae. And I'm only touching on it just because I don't want to make this super long-winded, but you've also then moved into philanthropy, and I believe, are you still CEO of Feed a Billion?
I am, yes.
Yeah. And then you're still actively involved in missions to free enslaved children from the sex trade. So you go, boots on the ground into other countries and donate your time and energy and effort, and I'm sure your funds as well, to support those missions. So I'm going to end it there, but thank you very much for being here, brother.
It was fun because you and I got to go do a rescue together.
We did.
With Tony Robbins.
That's right.
Putting him undercover. It's easy to put you and I undercover because, we could put on wigs or do whatever we need to, but how do you put Tony Robbins undercover, right?
A 6'7" giant, right? It's, and I know he's, heavily finances another operation, I think separate to the one that you were in, but the work that they're doing there is just fantastic. It's a much needed philanthropic endeavor to free children and people. It's not just children, but there's more people enslaved today in the world than any time in the history of this planet, and which is mind-blowing and shocking to say the least.
Yeah, it is. And, and just to get to see, again, you get to know people at a different level. You and I have known each other for many, many years in different circumstances, but you go into that environment, you learn more about people when you're doing something of that nature, and just watching you operate and your primary objective, I think there was to protect Tony. But ultimately, I felt safer because you were there. It was good. It was good having another big bald brother with me.
Yeah. It's speaking of bald brothers. I was saying to Heather, our producer, I don't know if people will know the difference between us because we look so much alike. But you got the glasses.
That's why I wore glasses, brother. It was that, and grew a little bit of a goatee. It was like, they're just going to think that he's talking to himself if I don't.
That's right. And the sign with your name on the back, which is a great touch. Great touch. I love it, man. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. I'm curious, what's going on in your life with business? How's things going? What are you doing these days that's interesting?
Yeah, it's it's a great question. I mean, it's the life is always interesting. You and I talked before, a couple of days ago before the show, and there's always something that you're working on, and I think that's really where, joy lives, right? Is just being busy, doing stuff that you think is impactful. And these days it's just an outgrowth, right? It's always looking for that next level. And these days it's, I'm doing rescues like crazy with CERT Ministries. There's been 13 trips to Ukraine. There was the involvement in getting people out of Afghanistan. There's all kinds of opportunities to serve these days. But I think one of the most important things, and you and I have this in common, is that I think where I'm at, I've always been anti-bully. I really can't stand bullies. That was ingrained in me by my adopted father that you mentioned. He went to prison for attempted murder of me and my mom when I was 17. And it really embedded in me a desire, thankfully, to fight bullies, right? That's in the trafficking world. I think that, people that are hungry and starving, I think that there's a lot of things that people could do to help that situation, but they would rather have control, right, than to help people eat a meal, right, or to support them or sustain them. Domestic violence was my very first passion because of watching my mom get thrown through walls and downstairs, and that's, I started stepping in front of her when I was 7 or 8 years old. But I really have been focusing on what is that question, Dwayne? Like, what am I up to? What am I doing? And it's an outgrowth of being anti-bully my whole life. And then, really looking at freedom, individual freedoms. And I got to travel with General Flynn across this great country. The vax mandates and all that kind of stuff. We shut down the Golden Gate Bridge in a protest in San Francisco. It was interesting because I was speaking at the time from a microphone. I can't be canceled, right? I sold most of my companies back in 2019. So I sit in a very unique arena to be able to say whatever the hell I want and not worry about anybody canceling me. There was a point in time that they could have canceled me, but those days are long gone. And so really finding what is the right perspective, not a Republican or a Democrat talking point, but what is the right perspective to maintain freedom for our countrymen and for our kids in our next generation and our grandkids after that. And I took up that mantle, got to meet an amazing amount of people that I never would have met over the last 2 or 3 years. But as that, everybody has come to the conclusion that freedom is what's the word I'm looking for? Freedom is fragile. It's fragile. And so more people are standing up and more people are finding their voice and more people are stepping into that. And so as I saw other people stepping into that arena, I was like, where do I fit uniquely in this conversation? And I started looking, I'm a big history buff. And so I started looking and saying, every war that we've ever seen throughout history, right? We see the movies, we see the Bravehearts, and we see people, freedom. But every war, if you dig deeper, is economic, right? It's whoever wins those wars, it's not necessarily the bravest people. It's not necessarily the most righteous cause. It ends up being at the bank. It ends up being who has enough resources to be able to win that battle. And that's a place that I thought when I sold back in 2019, when I sold my companies, I thought, I'm out of here. I'm going to go do some other stuff in philanthropy and do these rescues and kind of live the rest of my life. But what has come about, and your listeners and people that are watching this will know in their own heart, is that was my life uniquely prepared me for service in this moment right now. And I believe that if more people, because I don't hear people talking about the economic perspective of freedom. I don't hear them battling, in our country, 33 million business owners. And when you dig into that, 33 million business owners are doing 60% of the GDP and 60% of the hiring. And yet we got called non-essential by a bunch of people who don't even understand the process of hiring somebody or making payroll or the genuine benefits to this world historically in this short window of time when we've had it, which is called ethical capitalism. And you look at ethical capitalism, and what does that mean? I have to, you have to, we have to fall in love with the outcome of somebody else for our business to work. That's number one. That's built in selflessness, not selfishness. And then what you have to do is you have to fall in love with your employees' outcomes, which is also not your outcome. And then you have to battle your own prejudices and fears inside of that business to become a better human being, right? And it forges you in the fire of battle each and every day when you own a business, because you have to be your best self. There is no room for racism. There is no room for misogyny. There is no room for, gender inequality. There is no, what you're looking to do is to put together the greatest team to serve the outcome of somebody that you fell in love with their outcome. And I look at business like this amazing opportunity that was granted to us here in our country. Again, going back in historically 1890, there was a bill that was passed for the first time in history. A centralized government stood up for the independent access to capital to keep it fair, right? It was the first version of the FTC Act, to keep it fair. In other words, not letting the money coagulate in the pockets of too few, which then gave them outsized influence in what happened in the country. It said, nope, we're going to level the playing field, and we're going to make that happen. That changed the world, brother. It changed the world. And how it did measurably was, before that period of time, everybody says, well, the abject poverty number in the world was sitting at 95% of people lived in abject poverty. Well, 1770, they said, well, it was America that did it. No, it really wasn't. 1776 came and went, and it was still abject poverty at 95%. The one thing that moved that dial in the entire world was free and fair trade. Ethical capitalism changed the world. And so that's been the mantle that I picked up. You say, what am I working on? It's really diving back into those 33 million people that got called non-essential, that had to shut down their businesses. So many suicides and people losing their homes, and people, all of that stuff, all because a group of people in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle said, we're going to keep the unethical capitalists in power. And they made money off of the stock. They basically put all of us out of competition, and really, made a lot of money on the backs of the people who created the environment for them to be able to do so. So I'm in that fight. I help people, my company, Anton Jae, that you mentioned earlier, we help good people make more money, get more time so they can do more good. And I believe the fight against trafficking, the fight against domestic violence, anything that anybody that's watching this cares about, is the needle is only ever going to get moved in easing suffering in those areas in a fiscal manner. You got to make money. And business owners are the greatest. They have the greatest hearts. They're the greatest servants. They're constantly battling the person in the mirror to become better. And so that's my family, and that's where I choose to spend most of my time.
Oh, that was a lot, man.
To keep it short.
Just to keep it short. That's it. So I'm curious, one of the questions that popped into my mind as you were talking, you mentioned that you'd sold your companies in 2019, which did allow you to be able to, not be, cut off or shut off. And I'm curious, was it also the fact that you had sold your businesses, or the majority of your businesses? Obviously you still have Anton Jae, which is the consulting company. But the fact that you were capitalized and couldn't be canceled, the timing was really good, obviously. Going into COVID, did that allow you the mind space and the ability from a psychological perspective, because you'd sold most of your businesses, in order to be able to take on this endeavor and triumph for, the people who need it? Because I think, as you were talking, one of the things that strikes me is people who, a portion of, people being able to find equity or find a solution or find money or be able to, manage their money or manage their business in a financial way is, financial scarcity versus financial abundance. And I'm just curious, was there a time there where you were like, hey, you know what, I'm in a place of financial abundance and I can help, and this is where I'm going to dedicate my time. But if you had your businesses and then all of a sudden you were sidetracked because of all the shit that was happening with them, from them being either shuttered or dropping by 50% in revenue or whatever the story would have been. I'm just curious on your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, because ultimately it did allow me the freedom. The timing was freaky perfect. It was freaky perfect, because I think about what would I have had to do, what would I have done? And this is where, the rub, and I have to ask myself the question, what would I have done? Would I have quieted my voice in order to stay in business? Would I have risked at a super high level all of the jobs of the people that were working for me? What would I have done? Would I have folded to the pressure that so many people did? And I think the answer is probably yes. Dwayne, as embarrassing as it is, I think that I would have, again, it would have been for the greater good of the people that were working for me and those types of things. But that's what made me so angry. And, and in those 2 years of speaking my voice and getting a lot of DMs, right? This was one of those things, the things that I was speaking up against, people were deathly afraid to say anything publicly. And so I got a lot of private messages saying, thank you, Jason, for saying what you're saying, because I can't say that. And I think about, and it just made me more and more angry that even had I not had the blessing of being in the position that I was in by a freak of timing in history, that I probably would have had to make that same decision. And it just made me more and more mad. And that's what led to the fight that I'm in now, why I'm still in the business community at all and playing the game that I am, is because it's opposite of servant leadership. People were getting pushed around. People were getting told, you're going to lose your job. You're going to have to do this experimental medical thing, whether you want to or not, is going to be, that's fine. You don't have to do it. Everybody's like, well, nobody forced them. Yeah. Okay. But I don't get to feed my family, or else I do this. Right. It was the greatest example of elite, coercion that I had seen in my lifetime. And you think back to all the times in history when you're like, oh, I would have stood up to Hitler and I would have done this and I would have done that. Man, it's a different thing when you're staring down the barrel of that. And your question is so valid as to what I would have done. And I would love to sit here and pound my chest and go, no, I would have stood up and I would have just, I don't think I would have, and it's not an intestinal fortitude thing. It was how many people depended on me, and the fact that, yes, I was better off. I probably could have survived it anyway, because of the situation I was in. But that is why I spoke louder and louder and louder. And it did cost me a chunk of what I had sold for to be able to fight that battle. So in some terms, it did cost me. In some terms, I did risk. But I believe, I'm a big believer in God putting you in the right place at the right time. And then also correspondingly, he gives you tools to be able to deal with it the best way that you can, if you're in the Word, if you're in, if you really are following a Christian life, which is, the life that I really try to live on a day-to-day basis. But I look back and I see those scenarios, and it did pull me even further towards wanting to make sure that this stuff doesn't happen. Because if people lose their small businesses, if they lose their jobs, and now the only replacement is working for somebody else, or even worse, that you're dependent on a centralized government, now you have to do their bidding, and we're reversing. We talked about the child trafficking. That's slavery. And we could say, well, we're still free to work for the government or whatever, but it becomes indentured servitude at its best and slavery at its worst. And so that's what has inspired me to continue to fight this fight, is if we lose that in this country, what are my kids going to grow up in? You know, what are my grandkids going to grow up in? What are we going to live in for the rest of our lives? And so now I'm willing to lose every dollar that I have. I'm willing to lose my life in service of these kids. You know, we go through doors with bulletproof vests on. That's no joke, you know? And so I'm willing now, thank God, because it happened so fast. People had to make snap decisions about their career and about their medical health and because they were being just stuffed down their throat. Everybody's dying and blah, blah, blah. Like, snap decisions. I'm more prepared to make a better snap decision through the lens of, is this going to cost us our freedom, or is it going to cost me some inconvenience by losing all of my money or my influence or even my life or you know, my freedom, being locked up or whatever it is? I'm better prepared to make that decision. And the answer is, I'm always going to stand up for what's right, regardless of the cost.
You know, I honor you for the work you're doing. I think it's spectacular. The reason why I asked you the question was it was exactly, and you kind of, you know, went into it a bit, was you know, the universe puts you in a place at certain times to do certain things. And it teaches you, you know, to, once you get to take on skills and learn some tools and create and forge your courage or your destiny or your integrity or your path or whatever you want to call it. And, you know, just being able to have sold your businesses to be able to do what you're doing. And because a lot of people can't stand up, you know, especially in small business. I mean, you've been around this all your whole life, but people can't stand up and fend for themselves or fight for themselves because they're so busy just trying to fight for their customers or fight for their employees or fight for, you know, their business or their family, like you had said earlier. So I really take my hat off to you for what you're doing. I'm curious, Jay, at the very beginning we talked about, you had mentioned the word anti-bullying. And it's obviously like you're so passionate to be working on what you're working on right now. And I know that, you know, we've known each other for, God, it's got to be 14, 15 years here. I know that, you know, building your business, building your consulting business, one of the things that like drove you was helping other business owners, you know, create, you know, their success, their image, their, you know, what they desired most. And it's the one thing that I think I just admire you most about is the passion that you have for people. And I'm curious, you know, when you had shared and we talked about your adopted father, you know, going to prison for attempted murder, and you've been standing in front of your mother since you were 7 or 8 years old. How does one, I mean, you could have gone one way or the other. You could have gone towards, you know, this champion of, I'll just use the word justice. I don't want to put a word in your mouth or anything, but it's the first one that popped into my mind. But, you know, being a champion of justice and a champion of people versus a bully himself. Can you go back that far and actually kind of determine what it was that kind of drove you to take the path of, you know, for people versus, you know, for yourself and against people?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, it's like I always venture to tell the truth. Like, you asked me a question, what would I have done during, you know, if I hadn't have sold my companies? Like, I have to answer that in truth, as painful as it is sometimes. And the answer is that I actually did become that bully. You know, I did. Again, it's for your viewers, right? It's not about my journey. It's about all of our journeys. For the biggest part of our life, and somebody said it against that's smarter than me, said, you know, there's 2 times in your life: when you're born, and then when you realize why you were born. You know, it's sort of 2 different births. And I think until that second one happens, you're living patterns that you observed, you know, nurture versus nature, right? It was like, what did you observe in your environment? And so I dealt drugs. I did jail time. I was such a good fighter because I'd been fighting a full grown man. I collected money from people who didn't pay for their drugs, but I knew there was there was some great things that happened. I would get beat up so bad as a kid that I would get locked in my room because my face would be so beat up. And I always had in my room, my grandmother always made sure that I had a Bible in there. And I didn't become a Christian until a few years ago. So I was not a religious kid, but what do you do with your time, when your eyes finally are, not swollen so much that you can actually read? I read the Bible, and not from a religious standpoint, but from a series of stories. And I gained from that the guidance and the leadership. I'm always fascinated by people like you and Tony and, other men that are upstanding. They're good fathers. They're good husbands. Like I always, I always wanted to have that, but it wasn't what I was seeing. And so it was interesting because when my adopted father went to prison, my excuse went to prison. My excuse for why I was being a jerk, why I was breaking the law, my excuse for, poor me, my daddy this, my dad that, like blah, blah, blah. My excuse went away and got locked up. And so now I had to stare down the barrel of who I was deciding to be and what kind of man I was going to be and what kind of father I was going to be. And I'll never forget, I was already deciding to get out of the gang lifestyle, and my son was born, and it was the week he was born. And I was like, man, what kind of a dad am I going to be? This is like, what kind of a person does the things that I'm doing right now? And then what kind of leadership is that going to be? And I was literally at the last drug deal, second to the last. I'll tell you about the last one, but the second to last drug deal that I was doing. And I really didn't even want to be there. I was just telling the guy that I was hanging out with, I'm like, I think I'm done. He's like, well, you might be done, but we have this deal going down out in the parking lot tonight. And that night, I saw this glimmer in the, sort of in the moonlight or off of the street lights or whatever it was. And his guy had a knife. And so he was about to rob us. And I pushed my friend out of the way, and it exposed my chest, and he went with a knife. I've got a scar all the way across my chest, but it went in my chest. And as soon as it hit my chest, I was like, a Bible verse popped into my head. And again, remember, I wasn't religious, but it was a Bible verse. And it was the Bible verse that said, the sins of the father are born onto the children, which basically means if you don't take responsibility, lead an upstanding life, that all of that stuff is going to be shoveled onto your kid to try to figure it out. And I was like, if I survive this, then I am going to change my life. I'm going to do something different. I didn't know what it was. Much like people you've seen, we've been around the Tony Robbins world a lot of times. People come in there and they're like, well, now I know there's a different way to think and be and act, but what do I do? Right. And so I look back to your question, and it was that moment where I had a son, a Bible verse popped into my head, near-death experience on my part, and a decision. Now, it wasn't a life-changing decision. I didn't know what to do. I had no clue. There was no inputs on how to be a good man, what to do. And so I came out of that. I survived it, and I just said, I'm done. And I went and got a job with he was eventually would be my brother-in-law, peeling logs for log cabins, hand peeling them,
Wow.
and for like $5 an hour, going from making a lot of money in the drug world and being somebody and being feared to being the lowest man on the totem pole, right? Making that kind of money. And then I got a raise. I went to work for my eventual father-in-law, 3 levels deep underneath of a mine, digging a sump all day long, and so, but I knew that I had to change, and I knew that I had to make different decisions, or else my son, that was my impetus. I don't know that I would have changed if it wasn't for my son being better for somebody else, making sure that I wasn't going to throw weights on his ankles as he walked into the world. I don't know that I would have changed. And thank God I did. And, you know, that led to my first business. And, you know, there's a long story after it. But ultimately, it's these small things that happen. And you just decide, you know what, whatever I was doing, I'm not doing that anymore. And then you gather tools. It sets your mind to seeking out answers that are better, that are going to solve these problems. For everybody watching your show, it's not going to be the clouds part and Jesus is going to walk down and, you know, and step right in front of you and go, here's the tools. It's not that. I wish it was that easy, but it's just like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. Now, where do I go? It's books. It's watching free shit on YouTube. It's watching your podcast. It's, you know, talking to a mentor. It's doing stuff different, because the human mind, the human brain is so powerful that it'll start to collect the data for an end game once you get clear on what that end game is going to be.
Thanks for sharing the story. I don't think I've actually heard that, so I appreciate you sharing it, not only for, you know, the listeners, but for myself personally. And I love, you know, that verse that you talked about, you know, the sins of the father should be put forth onto the son. Yeah,
they'll be born onto the children.
And I see that, you know, so obviously, look, I don't want to use the purpose, you know, to change is your son, but the driving force behind it, you know, what was the driving force? Was it the drive to become a different, better man? Was it like, what was the vision that really propelled you and drove you to, you know, take some of the steps that you had just talked about there, like getting a mentor, reading books, you know, the work, the daily work. But it's easy to go back. I mean, I've got my own past, and it's easy to go back to that past. And I mean, I found that I bridged years of going back to my past, you know, criminal background to developing my businesses. And then, you know, people would come out of the woodwork and you'd find yourself kind of intermingling this life for a long time for me. I'm curious, what was your driving force?
Again, I have to be honest. Growing up, we were so poor. We stood in line. I mean, I distinctly remember standing in line for blocks of government cheese, powdered milk, you know, the stuff. My mom and her look of embarrassment when she had to use food stamps to buy food for us, not having any food for, you know, like a week, and walking a dirt road with my mom to find asparagus growing on the side of the road.
Wow.
You know, and then there's the school aspect of it, where we were always the poor family. You know, we lived in, you know, just being raised by the guy that I was being raised by, we would be in a big city and then a small town, big city, small town. And no matter where we went, I was the poor kid, you know, and wearing last year's clothes or shit with holes in them or off brand or whatever it was. And so to answer your question, I have to be honest and say my very first drive, I knew I wanted to get out of the criminal life. But then what do? Do I want to go out and be a super upstanding guy? No, that wasn't the first thought. The first thought was, I don't want to be poor.
Right.
I don't want to be poor because of those assholes that made fun of me my entire career. You know, every school that I went to, being embarrassed about all that stuff. So my very first driver, Dwayne, was pettiness. It was pettiness. It was to say, you know what, I'm going to show these mofos. And I also had linked incorrectly, I found out later, the idea that the more money that I would make, the more people would love me.
Right.
And so I did that. I went from going back to, I was digging out that sump and I'm like, I got to do something, but I didn't graduate from high school. So what can I do? Well, I got told, well, maybe you need to learn a trade. So I did. I was like, all right, cool. So I started laying carpet I was an assistant to a journeyman carpet layer. And then, I went from that to working in a warehouse, and from that to selling carpet for the guy. From that, I went and bought my very first carpet company. And I made a shitload of money, more money than I had ever even known existed in the universe, which wasn't much, now in accordance to what I've made now. But back then it was like, holy crap, I'm rich, and so I did that. And then I bought the house, and I would have the parties, and and boxing parties. I would have these big boxing parties that everybody loved to come over, and I was buying jet skis and all this other kind of stuff, but I was completely miserable. Got a divorce, miserable. And then I lost that business. Matter of fact, I lost 3 in a row. There was like bankruptcy. It was like a domino effect.
What were they?
And when I lost them,
Jason, what were they? Carpet business?
Yeah, carpet, and then a gym that I had bought while I was doing that, and then I had started a little real estate sort of thing, and they just kind of bam, 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 all 3 fell down at the same exact time. Not at the same exact time. It was a torturous 2 years that it took me to go out of business, but ended up $2 million in debt, and that's when I lost my mind. People say the reason, one of the reasons why I'm a passionate advocate for business owners is I know what goes into running a company. And I know the after effects when it fails. And it is not fun. It is not something that I would wish on my worst enemy, because I was like, all right, I didn't graduate from high school. I can't make this business thing work. My wife is now living with another guy. My kids are waking up in another household without me there. I lost it, bro. Like, I lost it, and ended up going to California. I stole a U-Haul truck. It's a great story. I packed up my house into a U-Haul truck, and I moved to California in the dead of night.
In a U-Haul that you stole?
That I stole, yep. And from a good friend of mine. His name was Dwayne too, actually. funny coincidence. He's like, because him and his dad owned a U-Haul thing, and he's like, just take it. Like, eventually, drop it off at a U-Haul place or whatever, but I can't. He's like, I'm closing my eyes. and so I took off in a stolen U-Haul all the way across the country from Colorado to California, and was trying to get a job. At the time, I was having panic attacks, didn't know what that was. I was going through a bunch of stuff that I was struggling with mentally. And eventually I rented a place and sold stuff until there was no more stuff, until I got evicted. And that's where I got evicted. I started living on the streets in Southern California at the beach. And that's where I came across Tony Robbins for the first time. I went to a homeless shelter, hadn't eaten in 3 days. Going back to me buying everybody's love, I would make phone calls on a payphone back to people, and I would be like, dude, I haven't eaten in a few days. Can you Western Union me $10? And here's the answer I got from everybody, Dwayne. Sorry, brother. Like, they're answering a phone in the house that I had helped them buy, right? They're driving cars that I had literally purchased for them. And now they don't have any time for me because I'm down and out. And it was, I couldn't buy their love. All I did was buy their attention, and so here I am. I'm like, nobody would help me. And I had to go to a homeless shelter in Southern California to ask them for food. And I was like, this is how bad our egos can be. Even at that point, I was like, I'm going to wait till all of the other loser homeless people go in there in the morning, and I'll wait till there's nobody else. Because I was still carrying around pride. What an idiot. I'm like, and so by the time I got in there, I'll never forget this day. There was 2 things that were left. There was this pack of mushed brown, dark bananas, and this head of cauliflower that had the black mold on the outside of it. Those were my 2 choices. And the pastor who was running that homeless shelter, he was like, man, you don't seem like most people that come in here. He's like, what? There's something a little different. I was like, I don't, give me the bananas, right? Blah, blah, blah. And stop talking to me. And he goes, look, I want to give you 2 things before you leave. And he handed me a Bible, which I immediately threw back at him because I was like, if there's a God out there and he's going to let me live the life I'm living, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I was like, I'm not interested. And the next thing that he gave me was Tony's book, Awaken the Giant Within.
You're kidding.
Nope. And I read that book cover to cover. And, you know, while I was living on the beach, cover to cover, and the greatest thing, you know how thick it is, you know, and I got to the end of it, and there was this one thought that kept sticking in my head. It was like, it's in your moments of decision where your destiny is shaped. Mm-hmm. And I was like, there was a key sticking word, mine. It's in my moments of decision where your destiny is shaped. And I'm like, I'm in the work. My wife is living with another dude. My kids are waking up in another dude's house. My businesses are gone. My reputation's gone. My credit's gone. I don't have enough food. I don't know where my next meal is coming from. How has it been my decisions that put me in this place? And it pissed me off. It pissed me off. I could not stop thinking about it. I went to sleep on that stupid little bench going, how is this my fault? How is this my, and then I go, oh shit, it is my fault. It has been my decisions that has led me to where I am right now. And again, no clouds coming open, you know, no nothing like it did. It was just this small idea that I had to start taking radical personal responsibility for my own life. And so 2 weeks later, I'm walking down the street, and I've never seen this. Now, I worked for Tony, you know that, you know, and traveled the country with him. And then I was a platinum partner. And then we started doing, you know, the rescue thing together. And, you know, but I've never seen this. I was walking down the street, and on this brick wall, there was a yellow not cardboard, but, you know, the paper board. And it had Tony Robbins, UPW, blah, 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 live and in person. I've never seen it advertised on like that ever before. And since,
right.
You know,
right. That was in the old days when you had no money.
Exactly. And at the bottom of it was like $350 or something. It was really like it was $300 or something like that. Might as well have been $1 million because I'm on the beach. I got nothing. So I told you I would tell you my last drug deal.
Okay. All right.
I went to all the guys that had pot and marijuana on the beach, and I said, and I took their stuff on consignment, and I said, how much money do you want for it? And I went and made enough money to go to that event. And so I went to that event, and I'll finish this story because it's actually kind of hilarious. Went to the event, and you know how Tony at the end, he goes, you know, everybody that wants to get a picture with Tony Robbins, go back to the back of the room and sign up for Mastery University, right? It was $12,000 or some shit. But I had a wallet with my credit cards from back before I went broke. None of them were good, but they had those machines that it took the imprint of the credit card.
Oh,
right?
yeah. The MasterCard. Yeah.
So it wasn't the immediate, your credit card's bad. It's like, you know, you take it, blah, blah, blah. I was like, all I want to do is meet Tony Robbins. I don't care. So I went to run into the back of the room. I'm like, put it all on this credit card. So
that's back before the days that most of the young people listening to the show have no idea what we're talking about. But before you could buy stuff when you had no credit.
Exactly. When you had no money, you know? And so I did that, and I got in line, and I got to go up on stage and to meet Tony, and I'll never forget it because I knew, and a lot of people that have been through a UPW know, I knew that my life had changed. I didn't know to what perspective, but I knew that I now had some new tools to be able to navigate my life in a different way than had put me in that spot in the first place. And so I was up on stage, and I knew he had changed my life, and I'm a very loyal guy. You know, that's to a fault. I'm very, very loyal. And I told him as he was coming by and shaking hands, I said, and he grabbed my hand, and his fingers go up to my elbow, and, you know, you know, I'm like, geez, oh Pete, this guy's a giant. And I shook his hand, and I said, I'm going to pay you back for this someday. And he kind of looked at me like Tony does, you know, and he goes, I believe you. But what I heard, Dwayne, was I believe in you. From somebody to a nobody. Like this somebody just said he believes in a nobody.
Right.
And I can't tell you the presence. Forget about Tony for a second. Your presence, my presence, everybody watching here, your presence in the midst of somebody's deepest pain can change their life, And I didn't know, again, no clouds opening. I didn't know what was to come, but I eventually paid for that. I went to work the next day. I had a few dollars left over. I ended up going to a Red Cross and getting a blue pair of pants, a white shirt, a red tie that had cigarette burns in it, and some shitty shoes. And I walked up and down the dealerships until Ford hired me at a dealership there, and eventually paid for Master University. I went to, my first event was in Vieques, Puerto Rico, which was Life Mastery with Lauren Lahav at the time.
Lauren Lahav, she's going to be on the show, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you tell her, she's my hero. I mean, honestly, if there's an angel on earth, she's it.
She's a beautiful person.
She's unbelievable. So I go to Vieques. I'm sitting at dinner. She goes, "Hey, come up here and sit by me at this dinner." And I was sitting to her right hand. She was sitting at the head of the table. I'm sitting to her right hand. And at the time I was like, I want to go to work for Tony, but there was only 2 positions open. One was inside, phone calls for sales. And the other one was this thing called FSR, which was you had to be a speaker and go do Tony content for businesses. And I wasn't about to do that. I was deathly afraid of getting up in front of people and speaking. And the other job didn't pay enough. So I was just waiting for something else to come open. And so I'm sitting there and I told her my story and she goes, "Oh, okay, cool." And I go, "I want to get a job with Tony." And she's like, "Well, okay." And she picks up the phone and guess who she calls?
She called Tony.
She calls Tony. She's on the phone and I hear her go, "Yep. Okay. All right. Well, hang on one second." Puts the phone down like this. And she goes, "All right, I got you a job. And it's this role called FSR, blah, blah, blah. You need to go in and try out for the role, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like waving my hands at her. I'm like, no, I can't do that job. And she, to this day, you can remind her, she knows this. She looked at me and she goes, "Jason, stop being a pussy. Do you want the job or not?"
That's awesome. I could see her saying that too. Oh my God, what a great story.
And I'm a big dude. Like, you don't talk to me that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, she can.
She did.
Yeah.
Not only can she did. Yeah. And so I ended up going in, completely forgot my script. I'm in front of him and Gene McNaughton, doing the script. And a couple of people had gone before me, people, I'll keep their names anonymous, but they went up ahead of me and they were nailing the script. There was a script thing and I'm scared to death trying to memorize the thing, and there's this script this thick and I'm like, how am I going to do this? I'm going to be in front of people. Not only going to be in front of people, I'm going to be in front of Tony and, and his vice president of sales and other people. And I had a moment before I went up on stage to do my script because the other people went ahead of me. They're trained actors. They're beautiful. They have custom suits and they're beautiful human beings. And I'm up there, in this lime green suit, waddling my way up that I'd bought off of out of a secondhand store. And I got up on stage and I forgot the entire script, Dwayne.
Oh God.
No, the first line, brother, was, "Hi, my name is Jason Sisneros with the Anthony Robbins Companies." I couldn't remember it. I could poof, like out of it. And finally, I'm like, "Look, I have completely forgotten the script, but let me tell you what you've done for my life." And I just went boom, boom, boom. And by the time, crying and everybody, and I got the job. And, the rest, as they say, is history.
That's unbelievable, man. What, I mean, I know a lot of those players, so I can imagine what it was like. I do have a question. So, and not to rewind, but when you had the 3 businesses, what happened there? Was that the classic, had one business that was successful and thought you'd like kind of ball up and roll into a couple other things? You got some buddies that want to get in the gym. What happened? Like and more so just for the listeners, like what were the key pieces distinctions that when you look back on is like, okay, in the early days, this is why I failed. These were the crumbling points.
It's a great question because I will tell you that the number that I sold for in 2019 would not have happened had I not had those 3 failures. Because here's what happened when I was going through them. I was taking notes when I would lose a key employee or I would lose a contract or the economy tanked a little bit, which was what started the ball rolling, right? I thought scale was what all of these idiot gurus are out teaching. You know, scale means sell more, sell more. And so, which is not, that is not what scale means, by the way. And so when the economy contracted, I didn't know how to scale down. I just kept spending at the same rate, thinking that, oh, you know, you're not reacting to the marketplace. But I kept those 3 notebooks, and those 3 notebooks traveled with me when I went with Tony. And a lot of people, you know, a lot of people that go and work for Tony, that they're there and they get caught up in the limelight. I was never there for the limelight. I could have cared less. I was there to pay Tony back, you know, and to learn. And so it put me in the presence of some of the greatest business minds in the country and in the world and of our time. And I was able to beg and borrow and steal their time. And I had those notebooks, and I would say, hey, you know, I'll come over and do your dishes for you if you'll give me 15 minutes and just tell me what you would have done instead. Right. So the key components, those things then turned into 3 new notebooks that became my turnaround career. And that turnaround career then became my private equity career, where I was buying companies that nobody else wanted because I knew how to fix them. I can fix it, and I have fixed the worst of the worst kind of companies, and been able to take them to the next level. But the components that were happening it was a word called trajectory, Dwayne. It was trajectory. As I started to fail, I did things because I didn't really know. It's amazing to me how many people run a business that don't actually know what they're doing. Right. They happen to be in the right place at the right time. They're offering a service that people need, and they're doing the littlest little bit that they can, and they're living on what that leftover is. And so I was just one of them. I was suffering from the idea. 95% of companies fail. So I wasn't in bad company. I was just in a place where it's because you don't have enough money, cash flow. You don't have any management skills, which I didn't. Or you have 30% of companies fail because they create a project or a process or a business or an idea in their head, and then they finance it with grandma's credit card and a second on their own home, and they go out to the marketplace. Marketplace doesn't want it, right? So they go out to market with something that nobody wanted or needed in the first place, and that's why they go out of business. But it was trajectory, and I was making decisions to accelerate my company going out of business. I would drink. I started drinking. You know, I started, instead of putting my head down and figuring out the problems, I would not go to work for a couple of days at a time, you know, because that going there just made me feel bad all the time, you know, going into the business. Right. And so it was a series of decisions that I was making instead of interrupting this trajectory with somebody's knowledge. Like if I would have had a Dwayne in my life, I could have called you up and said, hey bro, like, here's what I'm going through. What should I do instead? I didn't have that. And so I just kept making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. But the one thing, thank God, I did was that I memorialized it in notes. And, you know, it's been a big, huge blessing.
Good for you for doing that. I mean, so if you look back and you go, do you think, you know, the bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, was that the need to be right or the fear to ask for help?
Oh man, great question. Definitely the fear of asking for help. Because when you run a business, if you break down the psychology of it, you start to believe your own bullshit. You know, when you're running a business, because who's around you when you're running a business? Employees, what do they need from you? Certainty. Yeah. Customers, what do they need from you? Certainty and service. Your church, your school, your what everybody in the world goes, Dwayne knows what he's doing. Jason knows what he's doing because he's got this thing called a business and he seems to be doing really well. And so we start to smoke our own pipe and go, yeah, I do know what I'm doing. And to admit at all that you need help, or to seek it out, or to ask somebody a question reveals weakness in an uneducated, immature mind. Okay. You're revealing weakness when it's the greatest strength you can have. Mm-hmm. but I took it as weakness. And so I buried it and I didn't ask anybody for help. And I just kept making ego based. It doesn't matter. It's going to turn it around. I'm a Superman. I'm going to be able to do blah, 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 which is total and utter bullshit, complete and total bullshit. And so, yes, it was the fear of that. And it was embarrassment. I was a leader. I was probably second or third in line to be mayor of that little town. I had worked my way up, and now here I am failing in front of everybody, my church and all the people that I'd given money to and all these other kind of things. It was a radical thing. I've learned since then, I am not my business. My business is not me.
Right. It's a good lesson to learn. It's a huge lesson to learn. I think, I've made the mistake. I've been pretty good over the years for asking for help. I've always had a mentor, but I see that mistake being replicated over and over and over again in other people that have businesses, that unwillingness to ask for help. We go back to, so you get through your work with Tony, and I'm sure the learnings were unbelievable. But you then start your own business again. You left Tony's organization, right? And then what did you get into? What was your path there?
It was, again, I think God has ordered my steps from day one, but when I was leaving Tony, I think everybody that's around Tony is like, I'm going to grow up to be Tony one day. Then you realize, yeah, I'm 5'9". That shit's never happening.
Right.
Yeah. So I had ideas of, being the next greatest speaker and blah, blah, blah. But, very quickly, I figured out that wasn't the path that I wanted to go on. There's only one Tony. Thank God he was in our lifetime, and I got to meet him and got exposed to his content. But it was a phone call from somebody who knew me from my bankruptcies. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, Jason, I'm going through something in my business that I know you were going through. Can you come and help me?" And I was like, yeah. And I said, "Can I charge you some money?" And he's like, "Sure." And I was like, "Well, if I do help you and you make more money than you've ever made before, can I get a piece of that too?" And he's like, "Sure, why not?" It was the beginning of my turnaround career. I didn't even know that there was such a thing, but I went in, I fixed his company. I had my 3 new notebooks, right? And I started these strategies and I was like, let's apply this here and let's apply that there. And crushed it for him to a place where he was able to sell and make a bunch of money. And then somebody else heard about it and somebody else heard about it and somebody else heard about it. And I got tired of making everybody else money. And that's when I started buying my own companies that were in trouble. But that's what happened when I left Tony. Is I got a start in the turnaround world, and thank God for that phone call. I don't know where my career would be or what I would be doing if I didn't get that phone call from him.
What do you think? What do you think are the 5 or 6 or 4, whatever biggest mistakes that business people make? You've done a lot of turnarounds, and you had a fair-sized private equity firm that you had developed. What were the mistakes mostly made, and what were you guys spending your time correcting over and over and over again that, our listeners are potentially making those same mistakes and maybe not seeing them?
Well, you'll have to keep count because I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes.
If you got 10, I'm good, buddy. Your experience is well documented, and so I'd be happy to hear whatever you have to say on this topic.
I'll tell you the biggest one, and it's the name of my new book that's coming out, sometime in the next 3 or 4 months, and it's called Endgame. The biggest mistake that people make with their business is not knowing why they're building it, right? And the end game to me means I go to the end and I say, this thing that I'm going to build, we'll get into what I call it here in a second, but this thing I'm about to build is going to take me to this destination, right? My end game. And the second biggest mistake that they make is they make it about stuff and things, right? It's going to have some stuff and some things. There's nothing wrong with that. But to know and understand at a core level, if everybody watch this podcast and this is the one thing that they take away, it'll change their business life. is to know that you're building your business to create freedom. You're building your business to create freedom. And that varies. What does freedom look like? It varies as much as the 8 billion different people exist on this earth. No one person can tell you what your freedom looks like, but freedom, you know, and there's a difference, right? The world seems to be rewarding victimhood these days. Everybody's a victim. And the reason why there's so many opportunities to be a victim is because it comes with it the excuse of not performing and not challenging yourself and not becoming a better person, right? Just as often as you can find a victim card to play, I can find somebody who looks like you, believes like you, has the sexual preference you do, is the gender you are, was born in the area that you are, that has less money than you, that is successful. For every victim card that people want to play, I can find a success card. And so it's not, so when we look at why are we playing the game, it's wandering around. Most business owners are wandering around in a forest, a dark, dark forest, just going, because I'm moving, I'm successful, right? because my feet are going in front of the other, I'm successful. No. Eventually you're going to run into a tree, fall into a hole, a bear's going to get you. That's what happens to people who aren't playing the game the right way. So number one, your end game, what does it look like? Well, it has that component of freedom. What does freedom mean to you? And that's the deep work that you have to do. Whoever's watching this and listening to these words, you have to do it for yourself. If somebody else is telling you it's not your dream, it's not your freedom. Freedom for me meant that I wanted to be able to own my time, that I wanted to be able to go wherever I wanted to go with whoever I wanted to go at any point in time in life. I wanted to have a home that was paid off. I wanted to have a couple of cars that were paid off. I wanted to be able to do good things in this world, which at the time when I first set this end game was anti-domestic violence, right? And again, your end game can change. There's people like, oh, I can't set this objective because then what if change it? So change it. Like, you know, change the outcome, change it. But you get to this thing and you go, okay, the main component is freedom. And all freedom is choice. When people ask me, Jason, you say there's no victims in the world. Yes, there are. And here's the dividing line is a true victim has had choice completely and totally taken out of their life. Those kids that we went after in Haiti with Tony and the team,
Yep.
They had no choice because they were physically imprisoned. They were mentally imprisoned. They were drugged, right? They were kept in chains. They're all of the stuff. They had their freedom completely ripped away from them. They're victims, and people like us that have the ability to go get those people, it is honor bound for us to go and act when somebody that is actually a victim. A victim in their own home and domestic violence, every 11 minutes, there's a woman being beaten in her own home. Well, Jason, she could just leave. I'm sorry. I grew up with that. You can't just leave sometimes because what if they kill you? What if they kill your kids? What if they leave and you can't feed your kids? What if they leave and you can't put a roof over your head? They are just as bad of prisoners, just as much a prisoner as somebody that's locked up in a cell somewhere. And then kids that can't feed themselves around the world, victims. That's not their choice. They're victims. We should help them. All of the other stuff, if you have a cell phone and a roof over your head and all this other kind of stuff, you're not a victim. You may have gone through some bad stuff. You may have had people treat you badly because of your skin color, because of your gender, because of your sexual preference, whatever it is, but you're not a victim, right? And that angers people sometimes, and I know it does. But until you understand that, then you can't understand that whatever you do in life, whether it's a job or a business, is set for you to create your first level of freedom. And that means for you to have the choice of whether or not you want to go to work the next day or not, and have economics not play a part in that because you've handled the economics point. A business, then, so those are the first two mistakes. Number one, they don't know their end game. They don't know that the key component of that end game needs to be freedom. The third thing is they don't put dollar amounts next to what that freedom costs. They don't say, okay, My level of freedom, having a home. What kind of a home? I don't really care. It's a $300,000 home that's paid off, and I don't have to worry about paying anybody ever again, and nobody can kick me out. Okay? So that $300,000 goes out next to that level of freedom. I'd like to have a car so I can get around. Boom. I need to have, $100,000 a year coming in, which means I need to have $1 million in a bank account somewhere spinning off a 10% return on my investment, right? That's the third piece, is that people don't put the actual numerics next to what their outcome is. You know this. We live in a world of people that are like, what is your outcome? I'm going to change the world. How? Yeah. Well, I'm going to be a good person. Well, what's okay? How do you measure that? Well, you can't really, because, I'm putting out so much good energy and blah, 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 blah. It's just an excuse. I'm not making fun of people who have the best of intentions, but what I am telling you is that will never get you to your objective, right? So then you reverse engineer and you say, okay, I've got those three things. I've got an end game. I know that component of freedom. I know that freedom has a dollar amount, and I've written it down what that dollar amount is. Now let's go to my business. Okay? Now let's go to my business and let's see what it's producing right now. What is it producing? It's producing, but by the way, one of the things that I'll tell everybody is that free cash flow is the king in business. You should be focusing everything on how much free cash flow your company is creating. But you reverse engineer and you go, okay, it's producing $50,000 extra for me a year. Great. Now, how can I improve? The fourth biggest mistake that people make is that they look at their business as an extension of themselves as opposed to being a machine that creates cash. Yeah. I'll say it again. Most people look at their business as an extension of themselves instead of building a machine that creates cash. Now, if you get that, then you understand how to create and how to improve the machinery, right? How you accelerate that is by hiring a consultant or a business coach or reading a book or watching, but you now know what information you're consuming, right? Now I know, okay, I'm building a machine that creates cash, and all I'm creating is $50,000. What can I do to create 100,000? And that excess, then the fifth biggest mistake is what happens with the excess in somebody's business. The biggest mistake they make is investing it back into a lifestyle to impress people who don't like them in the first place. Instead of, now you know your freedom number, taking that excess and putting it into an account somewhere, right? Into an investment, so that you know that you're getting closer and closer to your freedom with the excess of the machine that you're building. It takes away, look, I think in terms of dominoes, Dwayne, I want to knock over one domino that's going to take out 100. I don't want to knock over this domino and come over and do this domino and then this domino, which is what happens for the most part with all the gurus that are out there. They're like, well, you got to do AI. And so I go over and I'm like doing AI. And then they're like, no, you got to do Google AdWords. Oh, I'm going to run over here and do Google AdWords. And I have to have good hiring. So I run over and do that. It makes fools out of all of us.
Yeah, it's like playing whack-a-mole in your business.
I'll send you my very, very first cartoon. It was terrible in a animation company that I built so that we could do ads and do things like that. It's a whack-a-mole one. You're going to love it.
Okay.
You're going to love it. But that's exactly what people are doing, because if I would say, 80% of what we do at Anton Jae Global and with my growth course and all that kind of stuff to help business owners, 80% they've heard somewhere else. You've heard it, right? The real unique thing that I've done is figure out how to properly sequence the behaviors in a business so that you build a machine that creates cash that then gets you your end game, right? And gamification, which is an algorithm that ties in and blah, blah, blah. But that was much later in my career. But that's the biggest thing, is what are you going to do with your excess when you create it? Because anybody, whatever company you have right now, you can do double what you're doing with. I could tie my hands behind my back. You could put a blindfold over my face and I could help your company double what it's doing right now. But that's not going to help if that's not going to something predetermined by somebody who's going to have the diligence and the discipline to be able to fill that bucket before they fill I'm going to drive a nicer Lexus so that everybody thinks I'm successful. I'm going to put it on Instagram. I'm going to rent a Lamborghini so that I can do an Instagram post that are going to have people believe my bullshit more because they think that means money. You know, this is all the foolish stuff that I used to believe as a young entrepreneur, right?
Yeah. Yeah, buddy. I mean, people don't know where to put their money, how to reinvest it back, either back in their business or back into a machine that'll pay them later or pay them a dividend back to continue to afford either the lifestyle that they want to live or retirement or whatever it looks like. It's an interesting point. So you basically then, you begin with the end in mind and work yourself backwards when it comes to looking and sourcing out of the business.
Well, you asked me, there's two questions. You asked me what the biggest mistakes people are making. What we do and what I do inside the company is we help establish that with people. We take them through the exercises as part of it, but I know how to build a machine that creates cash. And it doesn't matter. Like all the companies that I sold had very few of them that were even in the same vertical. And because it doesn't matter what you do, it's how you do it. And I figured out the how-to blueprint on any business. And so that's what we actually do is we help actually build that machine according to your own resources and according to your own outcomes and according to, your own optimization. That's what we actually do. We go through each and every behavior in the organization. We build SOPs. We build the training. We build, the four major pillars of a business are knowing your finances, which most companies, business owners, this, are financially illiterate. Mm-hmm. Sales and marketing is part of it, but more companies die of indigestion rather than starvation. In other words, they make too many sales. Operations, like your operations of fulfilling the promise that sales is making, and then your duplicatability and your exitability of your company is culture and training, right? That's where that is. And very few people, most people are focused on, I do the middle finger for sales and marketing.
Yeah. They read so many books on growth and think that growing your business is going to solve all the problems, but really actually you can be growing bigger problems. And, as Keith Cunningham says, you're growing a tumor, before you know it, you're out of business. So I'm curious, when you look at these businesses that you've had, how many would you say that the psychology of the owner held back the company, or that psychology needed to be adjusted, or, there had to be maybe a shift in responsibilities for the owner? I mean, I see it often enough, and I'm curious what your experience was with it.
100% of the time, Dwayne. Because here, the psychology of the business owner. Now, let's set a different sort of premise here, okay? The psychology of the business owner should not be is not a component of a well-built machine, okay? And that's going to set people off a little bit. So let me explain. There is a overarching psychology of the business that should be predetermined with strategy and forethought, called your culture, right? Called your culture. That is the thing that should set on top, that drives all of the behavior and the psychology of everybody else in the business. It's a predetermined, well thought out strategy that is preformed. Because anytime you have the psychology of a business owner, and this was one of my biggest realizations, my business was only ever going to grow to the level of my psychology. And where you are in your business, and this is a big one. It's a big one if you get it and you absorb it. You are where you are in your business with your best thinking, with your best psychology. You're never going to wildly outgrow that, and you're certainly never going to be able to leave it and have the continuation of your cash flow happen without your presence. Because psychology is, it's basically just the mindset. And what the mindset basically is, what is a business? It's full of people, right? What are people? They're a bunch of psychology. What is psychology? It's a bunch of thoughts and ideas and terrible ones and how we think about money and how we think about business, how we think about rich people, how we think about poor people, how we think about black people, white people, gay people. It's full of a bunch of terrible inputs.
Right.
Terrible. And so we wonder why 95% of the companies fail. It's because whatever you're learning isn't working. You know, these business gurus stand at a what's the door that goes that goes around and around and around, and people just go
revolving door.
The revolving door. Thank you. I couldn't come up with the word, but the revolving door. And people that are the best gurus in the world, I don't fault them because they're making a shitload of money. They know that there's a revolving door where 95% of the people that go in it are going to come back out, right? Because they failed. That's business. And so they stand there and they go, here's my bullshit product. Here's my bullshit opinion. Here's my bullshit coaching. Here's my bullshit this, because they know they're going to go in, they're going to lose all their money. They're going to go out of business, and there's going to be somebody that takes their place. It's going to go, oh, I'm full of hope. I'm full of hope. Give me the easy pill. Give me the snake oil. And they're going to be like, here you go, Mr. Newbie. Here you go, Mrs. Newbie. And they just stand at that revolving door handing out terrible business advice to people who are going to fail anyway. It's an indictment on consulting. It's an indictment on coaching. It's an indictment on business principles. It's an indictment that snake oil salesmen and women can still succeed in a marketplace like this today. I would be talking, and I say this quite often, I would rather you go into your local community and go sit down with a business owner who's been a restaurant owner, who is a restaurant owner, who's running the carpet store or whatever business, and take them to lunch. You're going to learn more than you're going to pay 99% of the gurus that are selling business advice right now.
Yeah, no, it's valuable advice. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. That was one of the driving forces. I can tell you exactly, the question that I used to get part of the way here was, what is it worth for me to have 52 intelligent business conversations a year that I would not otherwise have had? And you can pretty quickly justify the cost of putting together a podcast and to have time with, the people that are the quality people that are on this podcast and the experiences that they've acquired over the years. Not only does it helps the listeners, but it helps me. I mean, it's so powerful. So I think that's like super unbelievably good advice for anybody who's listening to this podcast is, if you just go and take a business person for lunch and pick their brain about what they're doing in their business, what works, what hasn't worked, you can learn a lot. It doesn't mean you have to run out and do it, but it is, I think one of the distinctions you made earlier was that there was 3 notebooks you had said. Yeah, the 3 notebooks. That's probably one area that I've failed. I shouldn't say failed, but I have certainly not executed well at, is journaling and keeping, a context of, the things that I've done or thought or mistakes I've made. But that is a super, super important point that you had mentioned earlier, and I didn't jump on it at the time, but I would take the moment here to jump on it for the listeners that, journaling, keeping your notes, reviewing them on a consistent basis, thinking. And I'm curious, what's your thought on thinking and your principles of thinking? Because you had mentioned earlier there are some bad thoughts, that there's some flawed thinking, there's flawed thoughts from all the people in a business, and the psychology and what are some of your tips on, committed thinking that you would offer to people in terms of them being able to sort out their business, environment, and not even if they're in business, but like, I think a lot of what you've said is if you want to look at your business, look at your psychology, right? It's your psychology and your business are probably at the same level. Well, the same goes for your job or for your career. If you're struggling to get to the next level, there could be a requirement for a shift in your psychology and your thinking to get yourself to the next level. So I'm curious what you have on in any area of thinking.
Yeah. So first off, you make a great point, which is a well-run business eliminates the opportunity for poor thinking and poor psychology. How does it do that? You systemize the behaviors in such a way that it's not dependent on the mood or the psychology of the person who's executing that piece, right? And you can only do this. You talk about journaling, right? It's a core function of how my business is run, right? Again, it's sequencing, and one of them you said journaling. It's capturing what you make a bet, right? You're like, okay, cool. I've got to be innovating. I've got to be changing. Once you get the psychology piece out of the way, you get some good advice. You build a machine that creates cash. Well, then how do you manage that machine? And it is a form of journaling, right? We call it MEO sessions, massively important outcomes, right? But it's a memorialization of what we did in the last 7 days to say, okay, we have a meeting. We're going to talk about exactly what we did, right? This last week, this last 7 days, we rolled the dice on the behaviors that it was going to massively propel the company forward over these next 7 days. Did we do them? Yes or no? Right? And blah, blah, blah. We've got the whole system. It's a systemized way in the right sequence for you to be able to do this. But that then drops down to storage, right? So you go, we did it, we didn't do it, it worked, it didn't work. That drops down into storage that you can always refer back to. I might be getting a little bit in the weeds, so I apologize. I'll try to bring it back up here in a minute. But the point is that every 7 days, when do people mostly do their thinking? They do it at the end of the year or the beginning of the next year. And they reach down into their rear end and they do what Keith Cunningham calls a rectal pull. They do a rectal pull and they go, well, we did $1 million last year. We're going to do $2 million this year. Okay, let's go back to doing exactly what we did that got us the $1 million this year. Go team, right? Instead of what I you've got to inspect, you've got to measure. And if you measure, then you've got to have modification tools in place. So in other words, did we do this week to this week? Yes, it worked. Great. Then let's keep doing that or do more of it. It didn't work. Then let's modify it and figure out a different approach because we now know that approach doesn't work. Now that data drops down. It's a very simple process, but that drops down and you can reverse engineer. You can look back at it and you say, I thought we solved this problem like 6 months ago. You can go back to those notes and say, we did solve it. This is the person that's dropping the ball. Because you should be solving new problems all the time in your business. They should be new. You shouldn't be solving old problems. You shouldn't be weakly dependent and leaning on a psychology. You should have a system and a machine that is continually creating progress and increased profits and increased revenue and increased market share.
Yeah, there are such things as quality problems. Quality problems are the problems that you have not yet solved that you didn't know were a problem. So
I say this all the time, Dwayne. A business only exists to solve problems.
Yeah.
The only business that isn't solving problems is a business that doesn't exist anymore. So you want it to solve problems, just better ones of what do I do with all this damn cash I just made?
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny, like, not only do we look alike, we've known each other for a long time and we think alike. We really do. I want to throw one last question in here because you just hinted it at the end there, but accountability. Because just at the end of your last statement there, you had talked about, there's solve problems and then, basically who's accountable for it or where is it existing? Give me your take on accountability and then we'll maybe wrap it on that. We'll see where it goes here.
I think the best way to think about this is if you have a team. Everybody understands team dynamics, right? Let's say you're fielding a football team or a soccer team or a tennis team or whatever kind of team that you're into, horses, whatever. If you're gonna field a team in football, you've got to think about what are the positions and what is the outcome of that position. most businesses think in arm's length terms. And here's what I mean by that. I hate doing my books. At the end of my arm, I've got somebody that I know that does books.
Right.
So we also call it, I know a guy.
Yep.
Right. I hate doing my calendar. I know a guy. Right. And we end up looking around us going, we've got 8 arms now instead of 2. And we just think that these people could do the job, but we never identified what the outcome was for that role. Right. So how do you hold people in your company accountable if you don't know, if you abdicated, not delegated? There's a big difference. If you abdicated the responsibility of something that you didn't like or you're not good at, that's a smart premise, but it's to delegate it rather than abdicate it. So if you're not good at it, or it's going to speed up your time and you're better at promoting the business or making sales or, putting data or whatever it is that you're good at, it's smart. It's a smart premise to go find somebody. Now, before you do that, you have to sit down and say, what is the outcome of this position? Right? The outcome is, and it should be able to be repeated. This is gamification, right? This is how I figured out the algorithm, the mathematical algorithm to gamification and performance that ties back to your P&L. It's if you can nail it down to 4. I'm bringing in a bookkeeper for these 4 things. I need to understand my day-to-day expenses. I need to know my income. I need to know what I'm going to need to invest in with my capital, and I need to have a 13-week rolling cash flow built. Right? If those 4 things happened each and every day, now I go out and I say, okay, I need a person who's done this before. And I need to find the best qualified person that has done this before that I can afford to come and work for me. And then I'm going to train them on those 4 things of how to do it the right way. Now, if they're good at it, they may innovate and take it to another level. But how do I hire somebody and have them do something that I don't fundamentally, not precisely, fundamentally understand what I'm asking them to do, right? Precisely comes from the person who knows how to do it. But fundamentally, so you can put that in there and say, fundamentally, here's what I need from you.
Right.
And then you can hold them accountable by saying, did you get those 4 things done by the end of the day? Yes or no? And if it's a no, why not? Will do, can do, team fit, right? I can do the job. I will do the job, but I'm not a good team fit. I can do the job. I'm not going to do it because I'm lazy. And I'm a terrible team fit, right? That's the little triangle that we talk about all the time, right? Can do, team, will do, team fit.
Yep. Yeah. It's, I figured you'd be somewhere along. I'd say the same.
It's such a long answer because if you don't have accountability, you don't have a business.
Well, and I just find so many people, and I've made this mistake myself. I don't want to make it about other people. I have made this mistake myself where I've managed, I get confused between the operation of a position and the culture or managing of a person. And those are 2 completely different things in a business. You have to have culture and you have to have good management, and you do that with the people. But the position itself has got to be designed to receive or produce an outcome for the business. And if
you meld those things, this is the magic. If you meld those things, right? You figure out before you hire that person, can they do that? You've already determined what the job description is, right? You figure out that they're the right person. You figure out they're with them, why they're going to come to work for you, right? And how that position can then help them. And in order to do that, they've got to be a part of the culture and adhere to the standards that are set in the organization. They go to work for their own purposes. You don't have to discipline somebody who's working for their own outcomes. This is the big piece. Like, how do I hold somebody accountable? You very rarely, in my companies, you very rarely have to discipline somebody because they're getting those 4 things done or they're not. And when they're not, I can address it quickly and fire them or train them, or they can, figure out what they're going through to be able to execute on those. But if they get those 4 things and they're crushing it, they're making more than their hourly rate.
Yep.
because I've tied that together with the gamification and the finances, that if they crush it, they do a great job. I fundamentally understood the position. I know where it was going to affect me. Businesses only exist for 3 reasons: to make somebody money, save somebody money, or radically improve their quality of life. That's it. It's not confusing.
Yeah. That's
You're going to make somebody money, you're going to save somebody money, or you're going to radically improve their quality of life. It's the only way you can measure shit, right? And so if I'm bringing somebody in, if I have to hold them accountable, they lied to me about what their outcome was. They're with them, their dream, right? They lied to me, or they're not willing to do it, right? I'll finish with this, because we do need to wrap up eventually, but I'll finish with a statement that changed my business life. I just posted this on Facebook the other day. It's, if you don't want to be disappointed in life, help people that are helping themselves, right? If you don't want to be disappointed, help people that help. And that's the primary driver. A lot of times we put energy and effort into our employees that don't want to help themselves. Right. And you can screen a bunch of that stuff out at the beginning. I'm a business nerd. I could talk about this with you for 17 more hours, bro.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I could go on and on for days. Yeah. Dude, thank you so much for being here. I think I would love to have you back, because we've just surfacely skimmed on a whole bunch of important things for business owners to be able to dive deeper in. And again, it's not just business owners. I mean, these, I keep saying this on this podcast, the problems that we talk about, the format may be business, but the principles exist across, every area of your life, whether it's your relationship, your health, your career, your church. It's all there for everybody. And I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us today, buddy. It's so great to see you. So great to have a quality conversation. It's been well before COVID, I think, since we saw each other last. And so, I'm so honored to have you here.
I'm honored to be here. I'm honored that you asked me to. I love that you're doing this. As soon as I saw that you're doing it, I'm like, these are going to be some of the greatest podcasts that anybody will ever watch.
Well, thanks for that one.
Because you have again, you can't undervalue the relationships that you've built, because people trust you. And that means that people are going to watch this, whether they know you or not. They're going to get right off the bat that the people that are talking to you trust you implicitly. I had to trust you with my life. You had to trust me with my life. That was a unique situation, but ultimately I trust you, and I'm going to come and I'm going to give you my best. And I think that that's what people will get. And the information, my show, I've watched a couple of your other shows already. They're packed, man. You are bringing a lot of value to people that need it, not just in business, but in life, and trying to succeed on an individual basis. So thank you from all of the people that are going to get their lives changed from watching your podcast and getting to know you. And also thank you for the honor of being asked to be on your show. Well, it really means a lot to me, brother.
Thank you for those words. I really do appreciate it. And I will say that is the reason why we're doing this. I'm not selling advertising. I'm not trying to make money. I don't have anything to sell. I just, I want people to have a better life. And,
you don't need any money for hair product.
That's right. Life is cheap for me. Thanks again. Appreciate you being here. I'm so grateful. I'm honored. Jason, can you let anybody know how to reach you and things that you're doing and things that you're involved in, where they can find you? It would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Easiest way to get a hold of me is jasonsisneros.com, which I conveniently had the sign above me so you know how to spell my name. Marketing 101, right? jasonsisneros.com, and then slavefreeproject.com. If you want to support the rescues that we do for the kids, that's slavefreeproject.com.
Awesome. And then the Anton Jae is ANTONJAE is the company, is the consulting company. So
yeah, jasonsisneros.com is tied to Anton Jae and whatever else I'm doing. It's got all my socials and all that kind of fun stuff on there as well.
Awesome, brother. Well, again, appreciate you, man. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate you, brother.
We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
No problem.
Peace.
My pleasure.